Let us now turn our attention to the different methods of use of relevant sources to understand and appreciate cultural history of ancient India. This is an arena which is very diverse thematically and also in terms of sources. In trying to understand the cultural history of ancient India, historians would like to discuss language, literature, diverse religious groups, philosophical tenets, and the development of visual arts. All this come under the rubric of cultural history. And what are the different sources which can be profitably utilized? There is little doubt that early India produced a very large bulk of textual materials. A great number of these textual materials were written in Sanskrit. Moment we talk of the literary culture of India, this is a term nowadays used by Sheldon Pollock. Moment one talks of literary cultures, one tends to associate all literary activities in ancient India in one single language, that is Sanskrit. Nobody denies the importance of Sanskrit as a very significant language, and its contribution to Indian culture is enormous. Yet one cannot miss the obvious point that there were, besides Sanskrit, languages like Prakrit, Pali, Tamil, and also particularly from 800 AD onwards, we see the emergence of many regional vernaculars, and literature was produced, say, after 800 AD in such regional vernaculars like Maharashtri, like Odia, like Telugu. So once again, the stereotypical monolithic image that by literary creations of India one always looks at Sanskrit texts and production of Sanskrit literature is perhaps not a correct statement. The earliest form of Sanskrit literature obviously goes back to the Vedic texts, where one can see before Panini's grammar prepared the ground for what is classical Sanskrit language, we see the earlier Sanskrit in the vast Vedic corpus, which is the mainstay of the historians to understand Vedic religion and philosophy. How from the relatively simple and direct worship of different natural elements in the poems and hymns created by Rigvedic seers, one gradually sees the complexities of very elaborate rituals of sacrificial cults, yajnas, is writ large in the later Vedic texts. How from that stage a great contribution to Indian philosophical tradition in the form of Upanishads emerged. Once again, one can profitably utilize the Upanishads, the latest stratum of the Vedic texts. Similarly, the study of Buddhism and also other such Protestant religious groups can be seen through non-Sanskrit language. The Buddhist canonical texts were written in Pali language. A large number of Jaina texts were written in Prakrit, yet Buddhist and Jaina texts from around 2nd, 3rd century CE began to also use Sanskrit. It was not a straightforward transformation from Pali or Prakrit to Sanskrit. There were many texts accommodating both Pali words and Sanskrit words. That's why scholars would indicate the existence of what is called hybrid Buddhist Sanskrit language. Now, these are also very interesting facets of cultural life. It is true that a very major aspect of Indian culture relates to religious beliefs, practices, experiences, and philosophical tenets, for which not only the Vedic texts are very important, but also many other Brahmanical texts, particularly the Puranas, are of immense importance. Many of the Puranas, particularly the major 18 Puranas, are composed with a view to championing the sectarian bhakti cults, mostly related either to Vaishnavism or to Shaivism or to the cult of the Great Mother, the Devi worship. If the Puranas are one of the mainstays of understanding the emergence of diverse Brahmanical cults, it cannot merely be appreciated on the basis of textual representations. After all, the gods and goddesses of ancient India are best visible through the images and icons. And there comes the importance of art iconography. Without understanding art history and the source materials for art history, one cannot appreciate the particular tradition of worship of a deity or different types of divinities. Take, for example, the earliest iconic representation of Krishna Vishnu, Vasudeva Krishna, and his elder brother Balarama figure in the coins of a Greek ruler Agathocles of 2nd century BC, which has been found from the excavation of Ai-Khanum in present Afghanistan. Now, it immediately gives an indication that Krishna Vishnu cult has become quite well established, not only in text but also in the visual representation of those divinities. Similarly, the utilization of visual materials, say the representation in the stupas in Bharut and Sanchi, would indicate how the Buddha was never shown in an anthropomorphic form. He was not shown as a human being initially, but through symbols. Symbols like the Bodhi tree, symbol like the footprints, or the figure of a baby elephant, or the wheel of law, Dharma Chakra. It is only, say, from 1st century BCE or 1st century CE, possibly in the vast numbers of sculptures in Mathura and in Gandhara, that one comes across the actual anthropomorphic figure of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Now, this is connected not merely with the transformation of the figure of Buddha in human form from the earlier tradition of representing him with aniconic symbols, but it also is inseparably connected with the change in Buddhist philosophy that accommodated and allowed the propitiation of the master in human form. This is a period of change when the Hinayanist school of Buddhism gives way to the greater prominence of different branches of the Mahayana school. Now, these are so intricately intertwined that is difficult to separate one source from the other. Similarly, the same theme of different aspects of the Buddha's life, say from his birth to his leaving Kapilavastu or to his enlightenment, his preaching at Saranath, his final great demise, Mahaparinirvana. The different aspects of the life of the Buddha is being depicted in three different visual styles, in three different sculptural styles, more or less in three contemporary schools of sculpture, in Gandhara school, in the school of Mathura, and in Amaravati. This shows once again how diverse approaches to visual representations of well-known aspects of the life of the Buddha was practiced. And in many cases, these scenes of the life of the Buddha appeared without any explanatory statement on the stone. These were so popular stories that the mere depiction in the narrative form would convey to the viewer that what aspect of life of the master was being conveyed here. In this way, we find how different religions, groups coexisted. There were definitely many contestations that can be seen, take for example, by studying the Buddhist texts, where the Buddha had to confront not only the objections from the Brahmanas, but there were also many critiques of Buddha and his tenets, say from the Jainas, from the Ajivikas, and many other such groups. It immediately gives once again an image of plurality of religious expressions, religious beliefs, and it also suggests that amidst contestations, there must have been an openness that accommodated the diverse religious ideas and led to their simultaneous existence. This can be seen also, say, in the use of images of divinities in different coins. The Kushana rulers were eclectic enough to accommodate images of different divinities, Shiva, Buddha, Nana, and many other West Asian divinities on the reverse side of their coins. This was also practiced by the Guptas. They accommodated on the reverse side of their coins the image of many divinities. The multiplicity of various types of divinities and occasional contestations among them and these things, the complexities, the contestations and peculiar scenarios of religious life emerges by using epigraphic texts. The understanding of a major facet of Indian culture, that is the art history, for which Indian civilization is justly proud, is the study of architecture and also the vast number of sculpture. The study of architecture takes into account the actual remains of different chaityas, which are actually rock-cut architecture. These are artificial caves or cave shelters hewn out of live rocks, mostly seen in the western part of Deccan. On the other hand, we have the very famous stupa of Sanchi. It is a particular way of approaching this architecture of the stupa by art historians that reveals to us how the stupa originally was possibly an earthen mound to mark a place as a funerary practice over the dead body of someone, later takes a particular Buddhist affiliation, and how then the stupa takes the form of a hemispherical dome, usually having a stone encasing with a number of attending elements on the top of the stupa. The stupa does not remain static in its structure but undergoes many phases. This is particularly seen, the stylistic evolution of the stupa can be studied by us historians by using the extant remains of stupas in different parts of the subcontinent. Similarly, from 600 CE onwards, one sees a new development in Indian architectural history. The emergence of structural temples, usually monumental in size. The period from 600 to 1300 is noted for the expression of very strong regionalism in Indian culture. If we see side by side with Sanskrit the emergence of regional vernaculars, we also see how three distinct temple styles emerged in three distinct zones of the subcontinent. The North Indian temple styles with its tapering shikhara or the superstructure of the main temple, and is called Nagara style of temple. It can be very easily contrasted with the Dravida type of temple in South India, where we see the superstructure very tall but constructed as a pyramidal structure over the main shrine. And in between, the area which is presently Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh area, there emerged another distinct style called Vesara, which in a way stands for admixture. This is also an area, the meeting point of North India and also the far south. That's why here we find the admixture of both the North Indian style and the South Indian style, and it is called Vesara, which means mixed style of architecture. Similarly, in the realm of sculpture of this period, we find very distinct regional features in both stone as well as in the metal sculptures. The excellence of metal sculpting comes to our evidence from the Chola areas in South India, rightly celebrated for the fascinating images of Nataraja, Shiva, and also the wonderful images of Buddha from the area of present-day Bangladesh and West Bengal, also partly Bihar, under the rule of the Palas. The style of sculpting of the same god, say Shiva, in the region of Eastern India and in Tamil Nadu have very clear distinctive features, though their iconography follows the common source, essentially the Puranic stories and Puranic prescription of the delineation of the divinity. Yet the style becomes very distinctly regional and had its own regional appeal. This is how we see the multifaceted emergence of sculptural traditions, and there is no one single Indian sculptural tradition. There are many such sculptural traditions, and this is possible by a meticulous understanding of the existing specimens of sculpture. How one looks at the different voices of a cultural phenomenon at a particular point. This I would like to illustrate at the end of this discussion with the case study of Somnath. Somnath was indeed a very notable sacred center of the Shaivas, located in the Kathiawar area of Gujarat, close to the sea. Moment one talks of Somnath, one cannot forget the copious description in Islamic texts how during the raid of 1025, Sultan Mahmud's raid led to the spoliation of the temple, the destruction of the temple. It is well recorded in a large number of Islamic texts. Interestingly enough, as Romila Thapar points out, that this terrible description of temple spoliation, destruction of the temple, rarely figures in an Indian text. Why it is so, it is a mystery. But one also has to take into account that rarely an Indian texts of say 11th, 12th, 13th century spoke about the invasion of the Ghaznavid ruler and the destruction of the temple at Somnath. The local Hindu community in this coastal town in Kathiawar Peninsula had maintained very amicable relation with an incoming Muslim, a ship-owning merchant from Hormuz in Kirman coast in Iran, and helped him with resources to build a mosque at the city of Somnath. We have to remember that at this time Somnath has not come under the rule of the Sultanate. In Gujarat still ruled the Cholukya Baghela rulers, and when land was procured for the construction of this mosque, the Shaiva Pashupata Acharya at Somnath fully approved of this arrangement and then finally approved of, endorsed by the Chalukya ruler Baghela Arjunadeva. With this, if we take into account Al-Biruni's statement that Somnath was also a very flourishing port, particularly to reach Zanz or Zanzibar in East Africa, then we see a multifaceted scenario, the cultural vibrancy at Somnath. It is the story of Somnath is not merely the story of its destruction. It shows the resilience of Somnath, the accommodation of diverse religious groups in Somnath, and that it was not merely a sacred center, but it was also an important center of commerce. That's why Romila Thapar, in a very interesting work, tries to analyze different types of sources on this very important sacred Shaiva center and brings to us many voices of the history of Somnath, which cannot be reduced to a single prism of a particular type of source. There are conflicting views, and it is not definitely a one-sided, simplistic, stereotypical story of Somnath. It offers many-sided aspects of the history of Somnath. It is in this way the history of ancient India becomes much more colorful and in fact a little bit more challenging to study, but it is also much more exciting prospect to study different facets of ancient Indian history, right from political history, social economic institutions, cultural history, by accommodating different types of sources and not approaching a particular period in history of ancient India through the prism of a single particular type of source.